Andy, should we try to hide salaries from staff? We just reviewed our annual budget with the team, and the whole salary section was taken out. But at the same time, bits and pieces appear all over grant applications in the 990 and everywhere else. Is this silly?
I like the word silly. It kind of is. And I mean, I think it's more of a philosophical question than it is like a true, yes, you should do this.
Exactly.
No, you shouldn't do it, right?
I agree.
So like my opinion generally is exactly what you've said is you, on one hand, like there are going to be inequities between what people are paid because when people come in to, there are people that have been there longer. Somebody maybe was super aggressive on the way they negotiated their salary and you were desperate for that particular role. Somebody came in and the hiring manager had a soft touch and like gave that person way more money than they deserved. Somebody got a weird bonus one year that ended up going to their salary. So you're going to end up with all of these like people that are pretty much, especially in larger nonprofits, people that are doing pretty much the same job, but have all very varying levels of salary.
Right.
And that inevitably causes conflict. So especially if I'm doing the same amount of work as you and you're getting paid
exactly
a third more than me,
exactly,
it's going to make me grumpy.
It is.
Right. So that's, I think that's what you're going, that was the instinct about covering up the salaries just to sort of prevent that amount of friction between employees about how come they get paid more than I do because they suck and I'm super good, right? And you don't, that's just something that you don't necessarily want to add to your nonprofit. So at the same time, you're right, the salaries show up everywhere. They show up in grant applications, they show up on the 990, they show up everywhere. During the budget process, like it's probably not that hard to get that information out. There's no requirement that salaries remain confidential. There's no agreement between employees and employers that you don't get to tell anybody what my salary is.
Exactly.
So I think on one hand, you kind of need to just sort of, I mean, my opinion, I think they need to be public. I think you need to own it and you need to make people understand that like it's your responsibility to negotiate your salary. Like, and you may be unhappy with it. So let's come up with ways for you to be paid on a level that you think is different.
So I'm a bit more cautious than you. I like philosophically the idea of transparency and salaries being public. Uh-huh. And to do that, I would want, if I were an organization going that direction, I would want to make sure I could back up, not that I owe it to anybody, but that I feel good enough about our salary and our compensation process. How do we determine it? Do we have a compensation policy? Do we have ranges, salary ranges based on market research that we've done to educate ourselves? And yes, someone who's got a lot of experience who comes in and applies for a position versus someone who's just starting out is going to get paid differently, and being able to share that with the staff. So I'm more about wanting to share I'm okay with sharing salaries if all that other stuff is in place. My personal opinion is very few organizations have done that well or have that kind of thought that is put into that. And they're going to have a hard time defending it. And they're going to create tension and turmoil and conflict in the workplace that doesn't need to exist. And maybe they work toward that and try to get the house in order so they can get to a point where they say that. Now, the other part, I guess the positive, I'm going to be like, pro and con here. I guess the positive, besides the transparency, is, with this whole sort of sense out there that minority and female employees don't get paid as much as others. It also puts a magnifying glass, which I love, right? Like, I think, cool. As a woman, I want to make sure I'm getting paid the same as my male counterpart. Now, the employer could also come back and say, well, the male negotiated more and you didn't negotiate when you came into this position, whatever. I don't know if you want to get into those conversations, I love the transparency, but as an employer, God, there's enough internal conflict within an organization. Do you want to add this additional tension point in the organization? And yes, can employees see? I don't think you have to really try to hide it, but I'm also do you want to broadcast it and put it, you look at state employees or government employees, you can find out what anybody makes. Mm-hmm. So, it's I don't know, like how much of this is about just full transparency. And I'm more cautious about full transparency is great when you have a good system in place. I really worry about what happens. Like you lose employees, the cost of losing employees, the morale that happens if you don't have that in place and you are not prepared to have those conversations with people when they start to get, upset.
Yeah. I think you're 100% right. I think organizations should look to how do we get to 100% transparency with our employees?
Yes.
Right? They should, that should be a goal.
That's the goal.
Right? Is like, let's figure out how to get to 100% transparency with employees. And those are great conversations to have with once everything is out in the open. Because if everything's hidden and you have these disparities in pay between different classes of kinds of people, that if there's still disparities in pay and it's being hidden, that's a bad thing for your nonprofit. That's not something that you want to defend later on.
No.
If it's out in the open and you can say, these are the rules that we use to put things in place. This is how we set our compensation. And to be honest, like we know how nonprofits really work. Like the first person got paid because the board of directors said, and we're going to pay you this much money, right? And that was like, it was just like, God said, this is the answer. And so that's what we did, right?
Yeah.
With no
justification,
no knowledge, anything like that. So in some senses, you're going to spend an awful lot of time building the structure that supports the existing salary structure. And at that point, you may need to level some people. I think it's impossible probably if you want to keep someone, like no one's ever walked into someone's office and said, hey, we realize you're so far out of range, right? That we're going to lower your salary, right? But what we have, what I've done in the past, like as CEO of a pretty significant organization, of people that did get out of range because at some point somebody made a dumb mistake and hired somebody with way too much money, or they were originally hired in a different role, and then over time their role has diminished, and so they're now doing a different job. They've been moved into a different position, but we didn't change their salary from the old salary to the new salary, so they're completely out of range.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to justify when you're just like sort of looking at the whole thing as a wide picture. But what happens is like when everybody is eligible at the end of the year based on their performance review, they're eligible for a 3 to 5% increase in salary based on performance. This person, you say, the range for your salary ended about $1,000 or $5,000 less than where you're at now. So as much as I'd like to give you more money, like I can't increase your salary. We can turn it into a bonus so that there's at least something for you to go for, but I can't increase your salary because you're completely out of range for the position you're in. So, and people, I think employees understand that.
I think they do.
But yeah, getting that structure in place and being able to defend it is sort of a long-term process, but I think would be an intelligent goal for most.
I love the goal. And, I was thinking about how many people have you ever heard say, I'm paid too much, versus you start to start to share publicly all the salaries, and that you're never going to have someone say, I'm paid too much, I'm overpaid, right? But you are going to definitely have people
They're
saying,
going to think it.
What the heck? They may think
Somebody may think it. They look at everybody else that's doing the same job as them and they're over by $10,000.
Yeah, and then they're like, yikes, how did that happen, right? They may think it. They'll never say it out loud, but instead you're going to get all the squawkers. Well, why am I not paid enough? Am I not as good as her or him or whatever? So yes, I think being able to, I would love to see an organization who does that and maybe could come on here and share with us. Maybe there's one that exists that share with us a little bit about how they did it and what worked well for them, because I think there's a lot of risk with it, but if it's done the right way, what a cool thing for the sector.
Nonprofit governance.
Nonprofit answers.
Nonprofit board. Nonprofit management.
Nonprofit marketing. Nonprofit resources.
The Alliance for Nevada Nonprofits presents Nonprofit Everything, the podcast about everything nonprofit, with your host, Andy Shurik and Stacy Wedding.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Nonprofit Everything. This is Stacy Wedding, and I'm here with my lovely, wonderful, smart as all get out co-host, Andy Shurik.
Oh,
how did you like all those compliments? And a special thanks to Alliance for Nevada Nonprofits, who makes this possible. So we're here at their service and here at your service. So make sure to send us your questions and visit us at nonprofiteverything.com.
This episode of Nonprofit Everything is sponsored by the Alliance for Nevada Nonprofits Job Board, your one-stop shop for the next step in your career. Searching job listings is totally free, and members receive a big discount when posting new jobs. There are dozens of nonprofit jobs available right here in Nevada, and there are out-of-state jobs too. Find it by going to the Alliance for Nevada Nonprofits webpage and clicking the job board button, or access it directly at jobs.alliancefornevadanonprofits.com, or find the link in the Nonprofit Everything show notes. I'm young and new to the nonprofit sector. Everyone I work with is kind, experienced, and older, but rather unintentionally, they always make comments that feel demeaning to me. One coworker has called me a baby. My manager constantly asks how my parents views my new position or what project I'm working on, even though I've never heard them ask anybody else about someone's partner, parent, or child's opinion on their job. How do I present myself as humble and ready to learn more, but still be respected as a regular employee?
I know how frustrating this can be. I think back to when I started in the nonprofit sector in my 20s, and I felt like every comment was about my age, or, how could I be doing what I'm doing at that age? Or there was always this comment, right? And it was really unnerving. So I'm going to just share from my personal experience. I chose to suck it up and let those comments be had, but try to prove myself with my actions, my behaviors, taking more of a leadership role. So I would, if I went to a conference, I'd say, can I organize a group of us over a working lunch to just share some of what I learned? So I tried to put myself in positions where I started to prove, get people past the age thing and go, wow, this is someone who knows her stuff, or who's really committed, or who's, got leadership qualities, or whatever that looked like. And so over time, that started to shift. And I was still young, but that started to shift. But it took time, right? So it took time, and me just proving, and me not really, when I'd get those comments, I would smile politely, but I wouldn't feed into it. I would just, it was sort of I'm not going to just add to it. So I don't know if that helps, but and I know probably that's the worst thing for the person who wrote this, going, oh my God, I don't want to wait and deal with these stupid comments. Right. But for me, it's the proof is in the pudding, and over time, then I started, it transitioned from, oh, you're such a baby, you're so young, or whatever. And then it transitioned to, wow, you're a wise soul, you're an old soul, so for your age. And so then I was like, okay, whatever, I'll take it. And it's, I guess to some degree, and now I can say, as someone who's middle-aged, I miss those days of the young comments. Now I know that doesn't help this person right now, but I guess that would be my take on it. I don't know. What do you think, Andy? What would you do?
So I'm trying to, it's been a long time since I've been in that position, but I do remember as soon as I was old enough to grow a proper beard, I grew one for a very similar reason, because I'm way older than people think I am. People have no idea how old I really am, which is fantastic. And I love it that way now. But back then, I think I didn't have similar feelings only because I'm kind of oblivious to other people's opinions of me, and which is never good, and has caused me all kinds of other problems throughout my nonprofit career. Yeah. Which is because what people think of me has rarely been something that I am concerned with. And I've also cultivated, and this helped. And I think the question, I don't know what gender the person is that's asking. I early on sort of also have cultivated an interesting scowl that I've always used, just because I'm kind of blind. So I've had glasses since I was a little kid. Yeah. And it takes me my eyes a while to focus on something. And so when I look at somebody, my first instinct is to scowl at them, because I'm trying to figure out who is standing there. Who are you? Because it takes a second for me to register who that person is. And so I think, this, for me, that's never happened necessarily, but I get that being different, that you're somebody that's different. So I'm guessing, because in the question you said that everyone else that you work with is older. Yes. So there are a couple of approaches you could take. Number one, you could just feel the same way you might about your dad, right? Or your grandpa, right? Which is just aw. So everybody has somewhere in their family, and all my grandparents have passed on by now. But when I think back at the kinds of things that my grandmother would say, or my grandfather would say, they were horrifying. Right. They were, and at the same time, you love them, and but at this, that what the things that they're coming out of their mouth are completely wrong. You just how can you believe that? That's so old of you to
Right.
think these ridiculous things that like today we don't say that kind of stuff anymore, Grandma,
yes.
right? So like remembering that, there is going to be some sort of generational difference between you and these people, and that you're never going to convince them that they're not old and you're not young. Like that's not something that's a physical difference that you're never going to be able to change. So you can either one sort of accept that old people kind of do old people stuff, and
Right.
like they're going to ask like, oh, they're going to ask about your kids. Like God forbid you get to a job and then you have kids, because the only thing that anybody that's older than you and has had kids or their kids are moved on or whatever wants to talk about is your kids. And you're like, that's great. I'm so glad you're interested in my kids. Yes, I've got a picture of them on my phone. I've got some work to do with you right now, and I don't want to talk about my kids. I just dropped them off at school.
Yes.
They're gone for a little while so that I can get
get
some
a
work
break.
done.
Get a break.
Right? So like there's always going to be these like, just like these interpersonal things that are going to be really, really irritating. And I guarantee you this is the first one in a long line of really irritating interpersonal things that people are going to do, is like just the difference between you and other people sometimes is going to cause friction. So that's one thing. You can either just like agree to accept that old people do goofy stuff and you can't control it. The other thing you can do is to be super passive aggressive about it. And if somebody says
yikes.
something that makes you uncomfortable, and I mean, this sort of depends on who you are too. Like some, I fully recognize that some people cannot do this, or they will get in trouble, they will get fired. Society frowns on it. But if you are the kind of person that can handle this kind of thing, if somebody says something to you that you find offensive, like either turn it around.
I was thinking that.
Right? With something like, how old are you? Or like, I think Trevor Noah is talking about the way his mother used to deal with problems. Like,
Okay.
so someone would say something horrible to Trevor Noah's mother, and she would just like grab it all, turn it into the largest amount of love, and return all of it as love. Like just completely reverse it and return it all as much love as you possibly can.
Wow.
So either you can be super passive aggressive about it, or you can just like try to embarrass them with how ridiculous they're being with these stupid questions.
Yes, and I totally I'm going to admit that crossed my mind when
Like,
when
how
I
old are
heard
you?
this question, but I also thought, okay, it sounds like you want, I mean, given the question is how do I present myself as humble and ready to learn more but still be respected? I really think the answer to that is the idea of how you show up every day. What I do think, as much as we don't want to say it, but how we dress, what we talk about on our breaks, if they overhear you on the phone all the time, doing anything that is, that comes across as young, I think that adds to that sort of perception. So for me, I just didn't give people, I was like, I'm not giving you that. You don't get to, you don't get to see that side of me. Like that side is saved for after work or like on the weekends with my friends. So for me, I took the very much approach of, okay, I'm going to dress and act, like these other people, which probably made me an old fuddy-duddy at a young age. But I sort of just was like, I'm going to be like that. But then so I did that for a couple of years, but I wanted then tell you about, like, at one point I switched it. And this is another thing. And I started thinking, you know what, my age, because when I was in my 20s, I was working with two people that were it was only me and two other people, and they were in their 60s. So it's me in my 20s, these other ladies in their 60s. And you know what I did is I also started thinking, my age is a strength. They have no clue about the apps or the technology or the stuff that I know about. So I'm going to become this invaluable resource because I've got kind of this younger pulse on things and know what's going on. So I also think you could look at it as like a huge opportunity to become like the expert, even if it is because you're younger and you're more, I don't know, what's going on in the world where some of these don't. Like, I think you could also like use that to your advantage if you can. And then, I don't know, grit your teeth and then, I don't know, have the internal monologue about what you would really, really like to say to them. So,
Right. But there, I like that. I think that's a smart way to go. I would encourage, if you're the kind of person that can pull it off, I would encourage being honest with people. If somebody says something to you that makes you uncomfortable, it's important to let them know what you just said. I found uncomfortable. I mean this with the most respect, and I know you didn't mean it in the way that it came off to me, but it makes me uncomfortable when you call me a baby.
yes.
And if you could stop doing that, that would be amazing. right?
Yes.
And then, either you'll get one of two reactions. You'll get, indignance, which is like, I can't believe they said that.
Right.
Or you'll get, you know what? I apologize. I'm very sorry for that. I will stop doing that, right? And then they know about it, and then they'll, bring you cookies and stuff. Do active board members who leave due to term limits generally stay active with the organization? Is there a standard for this outside of an emeritus board?
It's really a mixed bag. So if you think about it, and I'm sure everyone listening has probably, you may have served on a board or seen board members that are so burned out, right? They're tired if they've served all their terms, if they've actually been an engaged active board member, they're tired and they're ready many times to move on. And so with those folks, I don't think the engagement, re-engagement, or continued engagement happens right away. I think they need a little break to step away, right? And then you've got others that you can't, get off your board soon enough. We know those. But I honestly think it comes down to having a conversation when you know someone's going to be terming off soon. I think it's a great conversation to have. I mean, you can look at it almost like, and I think we've talked about this in a prior episode, almost like an exit interview for the board member, but sort of talk to us about the board service, right? And then what way would you like to, we'd love to have you still engaged in some fashion. Do you have any interest? And really kind of getting a pulse check on that. And they may say, not right away, but why don't you come back to me? But if you don't have that conversation, you don't even know. And I think people make these assumptions. I think it's actually, we do a really poor job in the nonprofit sector of holding on or engaging past board members who gave a lot, right? Theoretically, of perhaps resources, time, all that stuff. And so how do we figure out how we keep them connected? Because they cared about us at one point, right? So it seems to me like such a lost, just like sort of the whole concept of donor retention, where everyone spends all this energy trying to get new donors, just like people spend energy trying to get new board members. Well, what about the ones that did serve? I mean, you could have a cool pool of ambassadors if you do it the right way.
Yeah, I've never thought of it that way. It's kind of like, the difference between an acquisition campaign and a cultivation campaign with directors,
Yes.
right? You've got these people engaged. And so how do you feel about emeritus boards? It said emeritus boards, and I've got mixed feelings about emeritus boards.
Do you? Well, I don't have mixed feelings. I'd love to know your mixed feelings. So I am a huge proponent of, and I don't know if I would call it an emeritus board. I would call it emeritus directors or emeritus trustees. And what I would say is that for it to work well, you need to have clear criteria of not like who should be invited to be an emeritus director. Because what I see happen is everyone just says, "Oh, you're rotating off the board. We're going to plop you on this emeritus thing."
Right.
And I know, but then nothing's done with it. There's no definition of it. It's just like when people say, let's set up an advisory council, and they don't have any structure for it. It feels the same way to me. So where I've seen it done well is when you actually say it is an honor and privilege to be on an emeritus board. You have had to serve all your terms. You've had to hold an officer position. You've had to go above and beyond sort of the normal call of duty. So it means not everybody gets invited to be on an emeritus director. And so I've seen that work so well because, board members who really want that sort of badge of honor will work toward it. And those who were sort of, half-assing it don't actually, they don't get invited. Like, guess what? You didn't earn the privilege to be on the emeritus board and to still have whatever rights the emeritus board has. So I don't know. What are your mixed, I'm curious why you have mixed feelings about it.
I think I've seen it it may just be that too, that it's a holding spot for board members that are no longer participating, but you want to have their name involved with the organization somehow because they run a company or they're famous or
Yes.
right, or they used to be the governor or whatever, right? So that's the holding spot for people who actually do absolutely nothing, but you want to have like a sports star's name attached to your organization. So if there's a purpose to it, if it is an honor, if there's some like roles and responsibilities for somebody in that position, and I think that's where I probably just don't know enough to know like what a good emeritus board even does. Is is it really just letterhead for somebody that frankly can't give you the time of day, but you want to keep their name around?
I think most organizations are using it incorrectly. If you really hold true to what it should be, it really should be a select group and not, and it would be rare. There could be some years where you have 3 board members rotate off and none of them get invited to be emeritus, and that's okay. So it's sort of a really kind of prestige level. I think there's other ways. If you want to still keep someone's name, you can literally call it past board members, or, right? You can call it a different category, or you can, if you have an honorary council, whatever, there's so many different ways to slice that. But I think people are using emeritus incorrectly. And I actually really wish it wasn't just you rotate. I was actually just talking to another organization about this the other day, and they literally have board members that were the most dysfunctional, horrible human beings on this board, and they have them listed right on their website as emeritus board members. And I'm like, and it actually really bothered some board members when they realized this had happened. They didn't even realize people had just been placed on this emeritus board. And it's because no one had a conversation. There were assumptions made. Right. Oh, you get off the governing board and you move to emeritus. Well, no, that's not the way it should work.
So it's kind of not the question, but what should an emeritus board do? So if you really are, because the tone of the question is that you've got a super engaged board member, right, and they're terming off for whatever reason, or they're terming off because they're terming off, right? And you want to make sure that you don't lose some of that energy. Yeah. And assume that the board member feels the same way. Like, what's a good next step? Is an emeritus board the right, one that's set up correctly? Is that the right vehicle for that person, or is there something else? Just convert them to a super volunteer or.
Right. I think so much of it, again, depends on how you set up the criteria. So let's say this was a superstar board member that you really think should be emeritus. And then what it would mean as emeritus, you can define it, but what I've seen work well is you say, we're going to have an annual gathering where you get to meet with our current board members. And we have sort of a social engagement where it's sort of everyone who's ever been a board or is emeritus board member meet with our current board. I've seen sometimes there's a contribution tied to it. Sometimes it's just like, we're going to update you on a quarterly basis. We want to have you just come and connect with us to just hear what's going on. So there's a lot of ways that people structure these emeritus boards. As some say, you can come to board meetings. You don't have voting power, but you can come to board meetings.
You can come have the snacks.
Right. You can come have the snacks and listen. Who would want to do that, right? Let's be honest.
Maybe they're really good snacks.
But maybe. I was like, whatever. I think it kind of depends on all of it. If you have these different categories to put people, what are the criteria for them, and what's kind of the charter job description of them, and then you see where that person fits rotating off your board, right? And it could be superstar volunteer. Maybe they just still serve on a committee, right? Maybe they're on a committee if your bylaws allow it. So.
All right, that's it. You did it. You got to the end of another episode of Nonprofit Everything. Just to remind you, Nonprofit Everything is a production of the Alliance for Nevada Nonprofits. So go check out alliancefornevadanonprofits.com. Website is relatively new. There's a bunch of cool stuff on there, so go check it out. If you're not a member, please be a member. There are a bunch of ways that you can support this podcast. You can send us a question. You can share it with someone. One of the cool things that we're starting to do now is if you go to the Facebook page, there will be individual questions occasionally posted, so that makes it easier to forward to somebody, so you're not saying, hey, I'd like you to spend an hour, or not an hour, but a half an hour with Andy and Stacy. So now you can spend 3 minutes, because we're much more bearable in short amounts. Right?
Bite-sized chunks.
Exactly. But thanks for listening, and we will see you in a couple of weeks.